If you have ever felt forgotten, waiting year after year for a prayer to be answered, for a promise to be fulfilled, know this: God sees even the quietest faithfulness. In the echoing silence between your questions and his answers, have you wondered if lingering hope really matters? Let us step quietly into the courts of the ancient temple, where a nearly invisible woman named Anna kept her watch across the decades, and discover the lasting strength God gives to those who wait in faith. 1. God honors the faithfulness that the world overlooks. There was also a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. She was of great age, having lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then as a widow to the age of 84. Luke 2:36-37. Anna's life was mostly hidden, a widow for decades. By the age-old reckoning of her time, a woman passed over, ignored, invisible to the bustle and noise of Jerusalem's heart. She would not have commanded attention among the temple courts. For some, an 84-year-old widow with such a title as prophetess might have seemed little more than a footnote, a life spent largely in silence and waiting. But the Gospel of Luke gives her a name, a lineage, a role. She is not simply an old widow, but Anna, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. Every detail is intentional. Scripture does not record Anna's prophecies nor the specifics of her prayers, but it sets our eyes and hearts upon her faithfulness. The culture in which Anna lived measured value by public acts, priestly lineage, and family legacy. Yet God's eye rested on her devotion, cultivated in the shadows. Anna's faithfulness was not applause-worthy to those around her, but she lived each day attentive to God's presence. Perhaps you too serve in hidden places, praying for years, loving quietly, showing up in faithfulness that no one seems to notice. Take heart. With God, nothing spent in devotion is wasted. The acts overlooked by people are often the ones most treasured in heaven. Pause for a breath. Whose attention do we truly seek? Are there quiet corners of your life, worn with faithfulness, that you suspect even God has forgotten? Trust. He sees, he knows, and he honors what goes unseen by others. True devotion need not end when our dreams are broken. She did not depart from the temple, worshipping with fasting and prayer night and day. Luke 2:37b. What does one do with disappointment? So enduring it unspools across decades. Anna could have receded into bitterness. Her years of marriage, so few, ended early, and then a lifetime as a widow. In ancient Israel, widowhood was often a mark of vulnerability and social uncertainty. Instead, Anna lived in the temple, turning her grief into lifelong worship. Day and night, year upon year, Anna's life became a rhythm of fasting and prayer. In a world that measured a woman's worth by her children or her status, Anna's closest companions were silence and petition. Yet she grew not bitter, but luminous in devotion. This is not a denial of sorrow, but a transformation of it. Ancient Jews knew fasting as both mourning and anticipation, a hunger for God to break through. Anna's prayers poured out both her loss and her enduring hope. Devotion pressed through loss can bear fruit unknown to those who never tasted disappointment. Your own suffering, recast as worship and prayer, becomes a seedbed for hope. It is in these quiet, emptied places that God often plants his greatest promises. In your darkest chapters, do you withdraw or draw nearer to God? Can the ashes of former dreams become the incense of your worship? Anna's story is a testimony. Faithful devotion is possible, perhaps even deepest, when our earthly dreams seem irretrievably broken. In this, faith is refined, not despite waiting, but within it. 3. A life poured out in prayer and fasting prepares the heart to recognize God's salvation. And coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God. Luke 2:38a. After decades of waiting, Anna is present, right at that very hour, when the Holy Family, carrying the infant Jesus, enters the temple courts. She is alert, receptive, ready. Consider how long she had prayed for Israel's redemption, how many dawns and dusks had slipped by in disciplined intercession. How easily could her anticipation have become a numb routine, dulled by delay. Yet Anna's continual prayer kept her spirit awake. When so many had become blind to God's inbreaking, lost in the temple's routines, Anna's waiting had sharpened her attention. It was the practice of prayer and fasting that tuned her spirit for the Spirit's nearness. How many times do we miss the visitation of God because disappointment has dulled our senses? Anna was not passive in her waiting. She actively prepared her heart with longing. This is the quiet training of hope. When we guard time for prayer, keep watch at the gates of our hearts, we learn to recognize God's movements even when they come quietly, perhaps as a child in a mother's embrace. How do you wait? Is waiting for God a holding pattern or a sacred preparation? Each moment spent in honest prayer, especially when answers are slow, tills the soil for true encounter. 4. Thankfulness is the first language in the presence of fulfilled promise. She began to give thanks to God. Luke 2:38a. Anna's first response to seeing the Christ child is gratitude. She does not rush to claim, explain, or linger on her years of uncertainty. The long wait, the loneliness, even her pain, all of it becomes an offering of thanks when she meets the promise of God, fulfilled in flesh. There is a spiritual secret here. The heart prepared by faithful waiting is able to overflow with thankfulness when hope finally appears. Gratitude is not a forced spiritual discipline, but the natural exhale of a soul long held in longing, now met by God's faithfulness. Anna's thankfulness bridges the gap between the past and the present. It is the completion of many silent prayers. In that holy moment in the temple, Anna's solitude is transformed into praise and witness. The years of fasting become the wellspring of her thanksgiving. How often do our own answers to prayer turn quickly into new anxieties, or pride, or the pursuit of more? Anna's heart, shaped in the refiner's fire of waiting, is able to truly recognize and rejoice in God's fulfillment. When God's promise meets your waiting, will your first language be complaint or thankfulness? Pause for wonder. In what small ways has God already answered your prayers today? May gratitude grow in anticipation as much as in fulfillment. 5. The faithful are called to speak hope to others in their waiting, and spoke of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. Luke 2:38b. Anna did not keep her revelation private. At once she became a herald, proclaiming to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. She was not alone in her hope. There were others whose eyes searched, whose hearts waited. Anna's quiet faithfulness was not simply for herself, but for the encouragement of a waiting people. Her waiting was transformed into a testimony. the assurance that God was still faithful, even in unexpected ways. This is the ministry born of long suffering. Those who endure and remain faithful, sometimes for decades, gather wisdom and hope, not simply for themselves, but as fuel for others whose waiting continues. Who has God placed near you, searching in their own quiet longing? What words of hope might your life, your testimony, supply to them? Notice also, Anna does not promise immediate change. She announces what God is doing asterisk, the arrival of salvation, even as the world outside still waits for full deliverance. Anna's faith is testimony that God's redemption arrives first in hiddenness, then in clarity. If you have waited long and seen God move, speak courage to those still waiting. If you are waiting still, listen for the voices who have glimpsed his faithfulness. 6. Hope is sustained when anchored in God's character rather than visible results. Anna's hope did not rest on immediate results. It was grounded in God himself, in his mercy and ancient promises to Israel. Every fast, every prayer was not only a longing for deliverance, but a returning to God's character. He who still remembers covenant, even when years slip by in silence. This depth of hope, beyond visible change, is not mere optimism nor naive waiting. It is faith rooted in God's unchanging nature. Anna's faith outlasted decades of Roman occupation, national sorrow, personal grief. Her hope endured because it clung not to circumstances, but to the faithfulness of the living God. Waiting can grow brittle if it only seeks visible change. Anna teaches us to rest our anticipation in who God is, not merely what he can do for us. What promises are you waiting on? Can you trust God, even when you see no change, simply because he is who he says he is? This is the quiet courage that renews hope. Take a slow breath. Release today's insistence for proof and anchor your soul in the confidence that God remains steadfast, regardless of what you do or do not yet see. 7. The oldest hopes are fulfilled in God's timing, not ours. Anna's story spans generations, a bridge from the ancient promises to Abraham and David, through centuries of longing, to the very moment when the Christ enters the temple. Her tribe, Asher, was one of those thought lost in Israel's history. Yet in Anna, the old stories are gathered together and completed in God's perfect timing. We are often impatient with God's cadence. Years and even lifetimes can feel consumed by waiting. But Anna's life proclaims, the fulfillment of God's promises may far exceed the span of our personal story, yet nothing he has declared will be left unfinished. In Anna's faithfulness, God weaves together individual patience and the grand arc of salvation history. Her waiting participates in something far larger than herself. So with our own lives, your faithfulness, sometimes long, obscure, uncelebrated, can become the ground upon which future generations witness fulfilled promises. We do not wait in vain. Our faith may be the bridge others will walk across to encounter God. Are you willing to trust God's pace, even if it means the promise is finally seen only at the very hour appointed by him? Remember, in Anna, the hidden hope of centuries found its hour. God's arrival may seem delayed, but it is never late. 8. Even in the dusk of life, God gives new purpose and testimony. Anna is 84 at the moment of her greatest usefulness to God. Her age is not a hindrance but a platform. Her testimony is authentic because it has been tested across a lifetime of faithfulness. In her, we glimpse the promise that God redeems not only the early years, but the latter days. The world's measure of usefulness may diminish with age, but God delights in the voices shaped by perseverance and wisdom. Anna's story assures us that no season of life is wasted. Every remaining breath may yet serve God's purpose. If you feel your days are largely spent, or if you carry wounds and fatigue from long years, be encouraged. Anna's witness was needed precisely at that very hour. So too, God's purpose for your life may find its fullest expression precisely when you feel least noticed or least strong. Reflect gently. What testimony is God building in you right now? What hidden preparations may become needed in His perfect time? Old age and long waiting are, in God's hands, the fertile soil of hope for those around us. In every season, faithfulness is never fruitless. 9. True prophetic witness is marked by humble faithfulness, not public reputation. Scripture names Anna a prophetess, a rare title in Israel's history, and a high affirmation of her role. Yet we do not find her giving grand speeches, calling down fire, or leading crowds. Her prophecy is her very life, years spent in prayer, attentive listening, and worship. In Anna, the prophetic gift is not self-important. It is humbly inseparable from the disciplines of daily worship and waiting. She is, as scholar Joel B. Green notes, the paradigm of the pious in Israel, one whose spiritual intuition arises not from office or recognition, but from a life soaked in prayer. True prophetic witness often grows in the daily disciplines, not in drama and spectacle. It is the steady, patient, humble faithfulness before God that gives a person eyes to see and words to speak at the precise moment when God's promise enters our midst. What kind of prophecy are you seeking? Is it grand, showy, or is it a life offered quietly every day before the face of God? Perhaps, like Anna, your greatest influence will come less from public attention and more from the credibility of a long, surrendered waiting. 10. Waiting in community, not isolation, strengthens hope. The narrative closes with Anna proclaiming the good news not to the city at large, but specifically to those waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. There is a community of expectant believers with her, quiet, persevering, hopeful. God rarely calls us to wait in isolation. Anna's story hints at the importance of spiritual community, to gather with others who also yearn, also pray, also hope. These fellow waiters become both the recipients and the retellers of hope when it arrives. The pathway through long waiting can be difficult and lonely, but when we link arms with others who share our longing, the burden is shared, and hope is multiplied. Anna's joy became many people's joy. Who do you share your spiritual longings with? Who are the ones who, with you, watch and pray for God's movement? In solitude, hope can flicker. In fellowship, hope is fanned into flame. Seek out and give yourself to these communities of longing, however small or humble. God's promises are often revealed first to those who wait together. Deep reflection and closing truth. All around us, the world celebrates speed, quick answers, urgent results, noticeable achievements. But Anna's story turns this on its head. Her years, silent, faithful, largely unseen, became the ground upon which God's greatest promise first touched earth in the temple courts. Anna's story is not about miraculous interventions or loud declarations. It is about hidden hope, slow faithfulness, and the luminous quiet that comes from a soul anchored to God alone. Her life invites us into a paradox. The longer we wait in faith, the deeper our capacity to recognize God's arrival, and the richer our testimony becomes, not despite the waiting, but precisely through it. What quiet hope are you nurturing today? What long prayers, what silent faithfulness, what uncelebrated devotion? Anna beckons, remain close. Watch carefully. The hour is coming, perhaps in ways you never expected. For within the hiddenness, God is weaving his eternal story. And those who wait upon him will, in due time, see his salvation. Closing invitation. Let the quiet of Anna's life speak to you now. Will you let your disappointments become prayers? Will you turn corners of waiting into sacred spaces? Will you trust that your hidden faithfulness is precious to God, never wasted, always woven into a far greater hope? Take Anna's gentle example as your own. Remain faithful in prayer, diligent in hope, present in worship. Allow your story, regardless of age or circumstance, to become a living testimony to God's faithfulness and to the redemption yet to come. As you go from this teaching, I invite you, reflect in the comments on what you are waiting for and how God is meeting you in the quiet. If this reflection has encouraged you, subscribe for more truths from the Word, ancient wisdom for today's journey. May the Lord bless you and keep you in steadfast hope. May he open your eyes to his presence, even in uncelebrated places. May your waiting become worship and your longing become praise. And may the God who remembered Anna remember you and fulfill his promises in his perfect time. Peace to you, today and always.